We are anonymous. No faces. No flex. No permission slips. Donald Trump spent months threatening Iran, boasting about strength and promising maximum pressure. But the moment his bluff was called, he handed Tehran exactly what it wanted: a pathway back into the global oil market, and billions in potential revenue. A 60-day general license was issued suspending major restrictions on Iranian crude oil, petroleum products, petrochemicals, and related exports. The authorization extends through the 21st of August 2026 and permits the banking, insurance, shipping, financing, and commercial transactions necessary for those sales to occur globally. Even more remarkable, transactions can be conducted using US dollars. The restrictions remain only for certain specifically excluded jurisdictions, such as Cuba, North Korea, and Russian-occupied regions of Ukraine. Many analysts immediately recognized the magnitude of the move. Oil sanctions against Iran have been a cornerstone of American policy since the aftermath of the 1979 revolution. Yet, in a single stroke, Washington temporarily rolled back a major portion of that framework. And Iran was ready. Reports immediately showed increasing tanker activity through the Strait of Hormuz. Energy markets began reacting. Shipping traffic started recovering. Oil traders recognized that millions of barrels could potentially reach global markets as diplomatic negotiations continued. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. Nearly 1/4 of global seaborne oil trade passes through this narrow corridor. Any disruption affects the entire world economy. Iran understands this better than anyone. For months, Tehran demonstrated that, despite military pressure and economic restrictions, it retained enormous leverage over global energy flows. Iranian exports remained surprisingly resilient even during periods of conflict and instability. Various shipping and energy analyses throughout 2026 showed Iran continuing to move significant quantities of oil, while competitors faced disruptions. So when Trump suddenly offered concessions, Tehran did not hesitate. Iranian officials described the negotiations as progress. But there was a catch. Iran structured the arrangement in a way that heavily favored its own interests. The benefits flowing to Iran come first. The obligations flowing toward the United States come later. Iran's position has been straightforward. Washington must demonstrate compliance. Washington must prove its commitments. Washington must pass a series of tests. Only afterward would Tehran consider unlocking future concessions, involving nuclear transparency and inspection frameworks similar to those previously associated with the nuclear agreement negotiated years earlier. From Iran's perspective, the calculation is obvious. Why wait? Why trust Donald Trump? Why delay economic benefits when previous agreements have repeatedly collapsed under political pressure? Iran appears to believe that it can secure immediate gains, while postponing its own major obligations until later. And if future disagreements emerge, Tehran will have already received significant economic advantages. Meanwhile, another major problem immediately emerged: Israel. Because while Washington was celebrating diplomatic progress, Israeli leadership was sending a very different message. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly stated that Israeli forces would continue operating in southern Lebanon and would retain freedom of action against perceived threats. Israeli officials made clear that they were not prepared to simply withdraw because Washington wanted a diplomatic breakthrough. Even more alarming were comments from hardline figures within the Israeli government who openly rejected ceasefire approaches and advocated escalation instead. In other words, while Trump was attempting to sell the image of a breakthrough, some of America's closest regional partners were signaling that they had no intention of fully aligning with Washington's vision. Then came Vice President J.D. Vance. Instead of calming tensions, Vance attempted to explain Trump's threats toward Iranian negotiators by describing them as something akin to trash talking. Think about how absurd that sounds. We are discussing nuclear negotiations, regional warfare, global energy security, potential military escalation, and the defense being offered is that the President of the United States was simply engaging in what amounts to geopolitical trash talk.
What we told the Iranians yesterday is when you guys engage in what us millennials might call trash talk, you can't expect the President of the United States not to respond and not to correct the record. So when they say things that aren't true, the President is going to respond to it. I'm going to respond to it. Americans are going to respond to it. When they make threats that aren't rooted in reality, they have to accept that the President of the United States is actually going to set the record straight. That's all that happened. So yes, there was a little bit of threatening, there was a little bit of whining, but at the end of the day, the talks continued and we made great.
Vance later attempted to reassure audiences by comparing the negotiations to building a house. According to him, the administration had laid a foundation. The final agreement would come later, but foundations only matter if the structure built on top of them survives, and that remains very much in doubt. Even Vance himself acknowledged that ceasefires often do not truly end violence, they merely reduce it. That admission alone reveals the fragile nature of the situation. The administration wants credit for peace, yet its own officials openly admit that conflict could easily resume. And while all of this was unfolding internationally, Trump found time to focus on something else entirely: the reflecting pool in Washington. Again, as diplomats wrestled with Middle East negotiations, reports emerged that the reflecting pool was being drained. Trump blamed vandalism. Trump blamed saboteur. Trump blamed Antifa. He claimed chemicals had been illegally introduced into the water. He claimed damage had been inflicted upon the site. Meanwhile, local reports described a foul odor surrounding the area as algae, chemical treatments, and other materials mixed together. The situation generated widespread attention across Washington. People on the ground described an overwhelming smell coming from the pool during the cleanup efforts. Instead of projecting stability, the spectacle reinforced a broader pattern. When things go wrong, blame someone else. Never accept responsibility. Never acknowledge mistakes. Always find a new enemy. Always find a new conspiracy. Always find a new distraction. That pattern has followed Trump throughout his political career. When negotiations fail, someone else is responsible. When allies disagree, someone else is responsible. When infrastructure projects face problems, someone else is responsible. The answer is always the same: deflect, distract, deny. And speaking of distractions, Trump also turned his attention toward British politics. As political turmoil unfolded in the United Kingdom, Trump publicly declared that Prime Minister Keir Starmer would resign, attacking his record on immigration and energy policy. Soon afterwards, Starmer did in fact announce his resignation as Labour Party leader following political pressure from within his own party. Yet the contrast between the two men could not have been clearer. Starmer delivered a formal statement accepting the outcome with dignity, thanking colleagues and emphasizing service to the country. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio remained notably absent from the most sensitive aspects of the Iran discussions. Instead of personally leading direct negotiations, attention increasingly shifted toward J.D. Vance, while Rubio focused on engagements with Gulf Cooperation Council partners across the region. Observers continue debating whether this represented a coordinated strategy or simply another example of an administration struggling to maintain a coherent diplomatic structure. And then there were Trump's defenders. Figures like Congressman James Comer appeared on friendly media outlets insisting that Iran should fear Trump because he always follows through. But that argument becomes harder to sustain when the administration simultaneously threatens Iran one day and grants major sanctions relief the next. What we are witnessing is not a demonstration of overwhelming power. It is a demonstration of what happens when rhetoric collides with reality. Trump promised pressure. Reality delivered concessions. Trump promised certainty. Reality delivered confusion. Trump promised dominance. Reality delivered negotiation. And now Iran finds itself in a position to capitalize on those contradictions. We are anonymous. Watch the actions, not the slogans. Watch the results, not the speeches. Watch what leaders do when their bluff is finally called. We are watching. And so should you.